Hello, my name is Karen, and if you didn't know that, well, now you do. So today, what I'd like to talk about is the mind of a serial killer. Now, if you're a true crime buff like me and a lot of other people that I know, then you might be interested in trying to figure out what is it that really makes a serial killer a serial killer? What makes them so different than so many other people? Like, why is it that some people have the urge to kill somebody and some of us don't? So that's exactly what I wanted to do some research on, and I like to make a big disclaimer here. I am not a licensed professional. I don't have any degrees in psychology. I am currently a psychology student, and I'm working towards getting my psychology degree. So anything that I'm saying here is just done on research, but I am not a licensed professional. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. So first, I would like to talk about what the difference is between a serial killer and just a regular old murderer, because there is a difference. The difference between serial killers and like a normal homicide, if there is such thing as a normal homicide, is that normally homicides are committed by like disputes, whether it's from like a family member or your loved one or financial issues. A lot of times that's why homicides generally happen. It could be even gang related. That's why a lot of homicides happen. But why serial killers happen, they're usually driven by instinct to kill. They have like this natural urge to want to kill, which is not necessarily something that you'd find in generally a normal homicide. Now, something that a lot of psychologists have discovered and scientists have discovered is that childhood experiences could actually be a major key in the making of a serial killer. One thing that a lot of psychologists have learned about is attachment theory. And in attachment theory, there's two things that are important. One, the caregiver, the parent or parental figure, is emotionally available and wants to form a bond with the infant. Two, the caregiver can read the infant's cues and responds well. The baby's not just sitting in a corner crying its head off and can't get its parents' attention. Those are the two key traits of a successful caregiver and a successful thing in good attachment theory. There's such thing as disorganized attachment in the attachment theory. And what that is when you're a child and you're suffering from abuse from your family or your environment, and you grow up feeling like you're unsafe wherever you go. Now, as an adult, this can play a lot into effect. You could end up having completely unpredictable, confusing, and erratic behavior. And that could be something that could definitely lead to a serial killer. Another thing that could come from disorganized attachment is that you could feel rejection and isolation because you don't trust anybody. You don't know who or what you can trust. And this could diminish their ability to feel pain, which could also in turn lead to diminished feelings of empathy, or in other words, being able to understand and recognize what another person is feeling, or even being able to feel what another person is feeling. Now, if you're a true crime buff like me, you'd understand that there's a lot of keys that go into being a serial killer. There's a lot of things that happen in their childhood that develop them into being a serial killer. And some of those things are animal abuse as a child, if they were experimenting with abusing or killing of animals when they were younger. Another thing is setting fires. They find an obsession with setting fires, not just a minor fascination that generally the general public finds when they see a fire. They're drawn to it, kind of like a moth to a flame, literally. They see a fire, they just enjoy looking at it. That's not what I mean. When a serial killer is obsessed with fire, that means they're obsessed with it. That means that they'll go to the extreme to set fires. That means that they might even find arousal from a fire, or they might even find themselves having sexual pleasure from setting fires. Now, through my research, I found one other thing that I found very interesting with serial killers is that a lot of them had suffered traumatic brain injuries or head injuries when they were young. And through the findings of someone named Dr. Jim Fallon, he was able to find a lot of differences between serial killers and normal people. There's differences in their brain patterns and in their chemicals that are in their brain. There's interactions of genes, epigenetic effects, brain damage, and environment, and how these things were timed. Those all play into really what was going on in a serial killer's brain. Now, when it comes to head injury, it all depends on when the damage occurs. Now, one thing that he did find is that all of the brain damage that occurred was found in the orbital cortex, which is right above your eyes. And this area, the orbital cortex, is believed to be involved with ethical behavior, moral decision making, and impulse control. Now, that's something that said a lot to me. If you have a lot of damage in your orbital cortex, you're not going to be able to make all of these decisions very well at all. You're going to have a lack of impulse control, for that matter. And I found that to be very interesting because with serial killers, you know, they act on impulse. They don't have any impulse control. So I thought that that was something that was definitely a good thing to point out. Now, impairment of the brain can lead to violence and murder, and the possible dysfunction of the chemicals in the brain called mirror neurons. These neurons could help to read and understand the emotions of others. Now, those people whose mirror neurons don't function properly might lack empathy, which can make violent behavior more likely, which is something that we did touch on earlier. I think that's also something that's important to note, that it's not just how you're raised that affects you, but it's how you're raised that affects the chemicals in your brain and how your neurons fire. Speaking of chemicals in the brain, there's one other thing that I wanted to touch on, and that is the MAOA gene, which is also known as the warrior gene. This gene can also be found in a lot of athletes, which is probably a reason why a lot of times people would say that O.J. Simpson had this when he was going on with his case. And it's something that's not very well known, I don't say, but it's definitely something that I think is a good thing to look into. It's something where you kind of suffer through a blind rage when you're overwhelmed with all of this. And the thing that I found most interesting about this gene was that it's serotonin based. Now, serotonin is something that's widely known as being the thing that makes you happy, the thing that makes you relaxed and chill and not worrying about things. So why is it that this is connected to the warrior gene? The reason why is because this gene is found on the X chromosome, which is obviously the only thing you get from your mom, which is probably why most serial killers are men. Because as a woman, you get an X from your mom and an X from your dad. And so it's more diluted. You don't get it from your mom as much as you would if you were a male. Now, if you're a male, you're only getting that one X, so you're getting a pretty high dose of that MAOA gene, and you become desensitized to serotonin. Now, the last thing that contributes to serial killers is mental illness. Now, some of these cases are from people who suffer from schizophrenia or hallucinations of some sort. Now, that's not to be said that you have this disease, you're all of a sudden going to be a serial killer. That's not how it works at all. There's extreme situations that you have to be put into, and as we've discussed, this isn't just a one-hit wonder. You have to have a lot of these things together, mixing up in a pot for you to be able to get into this whole serial killer atmosphere. This is why I found it so interesting to me, because it's less of you're born with it, or it's less of your genes, and it's actually more of how you're raised. It's more of how your childhood was than it is your genes. So all in all, I found that it's more nurture versus nature than it is nature versus nurture to me. I think that nurture has a lot to do with what these serial killers came to be. It doesn't matter if you're related to Ted Bundy, if you're related to Albert Fish, if you're related to Lizzie Borden, if you're related to any of these people, none of that matters. Your genes aren't defining you. It's really just how you were raised and how you came into term with all of these. It's how you handled all of these. And that's what's really important. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch and learning something cool with me. If you're interested in more of things like this, I guess just let me know. I can try to make more videos. I always found it really fascinating, so I hope you do too. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.